Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University, and welcome to Introduction to Classroom Management. This video instruction is part of TED 377 and 378 Classroom Management in Secondary and Middle Level Education at Misericordia University. In this video, let's gain an overview of what classroom management is, a little bit about its history and its importance in secondary and middle level education. In particular, let's start off by looking at the role of classroom management in effective teaching and considering why do students typically misbehave. Then let's look briefly at a little historical background. And moving into the modern day, let's look at what are the goals of classroom management in today's classrooms. Let's look at reframing our concept potentially. Let's consider out of history the difference between discipline versus punishment, and then let's end by looking at and moving towards developing a philosophy of management. Let's begin by considering the role of classroom management in effective teaching, and let's consider the perspectives of several researchers. According to Strong, effective teachers are fair, they're equitable, they're just, they're sociable, so they can connect with students, they're enthusiastic, they've got energy, they're motivating, they're versed in classroom management, so they're prepared, they're organized, and they're able to implement classroom management techniques effectively, and they're very good in instruction. According to Moore, effective teachers are very good in planning and preparation and good in instruction. They can prepare a positive instructional environment. That's definitely classroom management. Use proven instructional techniques and exhibit professional ethical behavior. And to show that classroom management has been around for a long time, according to Ebel, going back to 1971, an effective teacher expresses interest in the students and is personable, friendly toward the students. So here we're talking classroom management ideas. Relates to students as individuals rather than just as a group. Again, classroom management things. Greet students outside of class. That's also a very modern focus in classroom management. And respect students as individuals. So as you can see, for a long time, classroom management has been in the forefront of teachers and researchers' thinking and concerns. You can learn your content well, and also you can learn different techniques and methods of teaching known as pedagogy. But the first time that you meet up with a group of students, some of the greatest concerns to beginning teachers are not the content in the teaching, but rather time management and classroom control. If you're not prepared, management can feel kind of like you're driving a truck downhill on a windy road, maybe even in icy conditions. As we enter into our study of classroom management, let's begin with some foundational historical research, because classroom management has been around since the very first classrooms. Let's start with the research of Cownan and his colleagues. So starting in 1968 and going beyond that. Cownan and his associates researched different concepts that contribute to effective classroom management. Specifically, the ripple effect he described. Ripple effect means that when a teacher responds to one student's behavior, and the way that the teacher does that will definitely have an impact. It'll ripple out, kind of like a pebble being thrown in a pond. It will ripple out and have an effect on the behavior of other students as well, and it can affect their motivation and their attitudes. Another thing that Cownan described, something that he termed with-itness. Now, to describe this, it doesn't sound like a very high-tech term, but what it means is the ability to spot off-task behavior and to redirect that behavior and to make classroom management feel natural. A lot of people would refer to it as teachers have eyes in the back of their heads. In other words, they feel it, they sense if something's going off task and it's going off track. So you can tell that idea of with itness, you can gauge it when you walk into a classroom within the first couple of minutes, because you either get the sense that that teacher really has it under control and is comfortable there, or the class is maybe like that truck driving downhill, starting to get away from them a little bit. That's what Cowan referred to as with itness. Effective classroom management will involve your knowledge of research, of best practices, and of potentially effective techniques that you can utilize, also mixed in with a good dose of your personal style. So in terms of getting into this study, think for a moment, because you've experienced a lot of classroom management over many years of education. What are the elements of a well-managed class? What have you seen that worked well, and what did you see that did not work well? Also, think for a moment, why do students tend to misbehave, not listen to the teacher, or go off task? So why do our students misbehave? Well, there are a lot of possible reasons and different factors that go into this activity. For example, some students are bored with the content, or especially with the pacing or the types of activities the teacher's using. Some students are testing the rules. Some students are trying to assert their independence. They may be seeking attention from the teacher and or other students. They might not understand the teacher's expectations. They might be watching what someone else is doing and emulating the behaviors of those students. They might be repeating behavior that has already been rewarded by other teachers or other adults in their life in the past. They might just be seeking peer approval. As we begin, let's consider the difference between two different concepts: students being off task and misbehaving. When we talk about an off-task student, we're talking about students who are not disruptive necessarily to the classroom activities, but they're doing something that's stopping them from fully engaging in the instruction. Now, when we talk about misbehavior, we're talking about students purposely not complying with the teacher's instructions. They're not following the rules. They're interfering with instructional activities for more than themselves, but they affect other students as well. So realize that both of these categories of classroom management issues need to be addressed differently by the teacher. Misbehavior in the classroom has a wide range of possibilities. It can range from minor annoyances such as needless talk or which is off the topic and annoying others, to starting to move to more serious problems and then maybe a major issue. Another thing to note here is that if teachers do not stop and address issues when they are at the small minor level, they can escalate to the major issues. So if students start talking and then annoying others, they might start getting up and moving around the room without permission. And then they might start going into non-compliance and then just become downright disruptive and then take more aggressive actions, and then they could even move to the more major issue of defying authority. What is behind and what causes these different types and levels of misbehavior? Well, there are many different factors. For example, it could be related to health of the student. Maybe they're just not sleeping enough. Maybe there's an illness. Maybe they have an allergy or a diet issue. Maybe there are physical impairments that are affecting their behavior in the classroom. Maybe they have a neurological condition. Maybe they're taking some type of medication or drugs. I realize that these could be in two different categories. They could be medications and drugs that are prescribed by medical authorities and physicians, or they could also be using an illicit and illegal street drug. Sometimes the influences from either home or society or their environment can impact them greatly. For example, in the home, their clothing, their housing, how they're supervised by parents and guardians, the routines or lack thereof in their home, and then issues such as divorce, illness, or death, and also things that are viewed on TV, social media, and other entertainment outlets. So the environment of the child has a tremendous impact on their behavior. Think about the physical environment, something that happens in our classroom, the arrangement of elements within our classroom, even things such as the temperature in the classroom. Is it too warm in there? Is it too cold? That'll definitely affect the behavior of the students. What noise level is typical in that classroom? How is the lighting? Is it overcrowded in there? And then we have to look at the students themselves. Sometimes students are making poor decisions. They're challenged, they're tempted by things, their circumstances, and also their personalities and their style and things that they're trying to do and pursue, and their habits may lead them to make poor decisions. The behavior of other students in the classroom, peer pressure, and being provoked by peers can have a very severe impact on the decisions and the behavior of our students. Realize that so far we've looked at environmental factors and health factors. We've looked at student decisions, things that are in the hands of the student. But realize that many factors that will definitely impact the behavior of students in your classroom have to do with or are in the control of the teacher. So let's consider some teacher factors in management. The teacher's attitude. Is the teacher being negative? Is the teacher setting up an authoritarian environment and being kind of like a bully? Does the teacher blame students or overreact in situations? Does the teacher believe in punishment for the class? And also think about instruction, because we said already that some students are bored in the classroom. Well, that has a lot to do with the teacher, not entirely, but the teacher is certainly in control of these things. Does the teacher have a good goal in mind and clear objectives? Is the teacher repeating material that the students already know, or spending too much time on content that students already have pretty good knowledge of? Is the teacher creating uninteresting lessons or not using good, meaningful, interesting, engaging activities? During instruction, the bottom line is the teacher engaging students? And keep in mind that it's not only the student, but sometimes behavior issues are kind of moved along or prompted or allowed to happen because of factors that are very much in the teacher's control. Now, let's add some context by providing some historical background on our society and what was happening in the classroom, and also in terms of classroom management. In the 1700s, we have a brand new country forming, or being formalized, should I say, at that point, because we had the Pilgrims here prior to that. The classroom environment was such that we had schoolmasters who would pretty much call on individual students or small groups of students to participate in recitations. So a lot of rote learning, a lot of reciting. Now, when this was happening with individuals or small groups, The majority of the class would not be supervised by the teacher. So if you look at this, it really reflected the order of society at that time, in which you had higher classes and they had rights over the lower social classes. And keep in mind that this country was spawned by Britain, where they were very class-oriented. Now, in terms of classroom management, well, the schoolmasters would rely on force and fear in order to maintain the order in there. Now, not only that, but they were also modeling the order in society for these students who would be future citizens. So an entirely different environment than what we're used to today. By the early 1800s, the classroom was changing again. Think of the show Little House on the Prairie. Think of the one-room schoolhouse. We had more students in a classroom. The classroom environment changed to reflect this and the needs of this situation. And we started to find the model by Joseph Lancaster about monitorial schools starting to be implemented. Now, monitorial, we're talking about monitors. In other words, students who were advanced in their studies or a little bit older could serve as teachers to the younger students or to those who were not doing as well academically. And they could also, at the same time, be classroom managers. Now, the teacher at this time would try to stimulate motivation through rewards and system prizes and also promotion. In other words, if you were a really good student, you could be promoted to a monitor and you could be placed above the other students. So in this case, management was being handled a lot not by the teacher, but rather by these student monitors. Now, sometimes they would use aversive techniques, and that wasn't a very positive thing. By the mid-1800s, we see that, again, society was changing. Schools were getting a little more formalized, a little more organized, and the classroom environment changed again. Now we'd have more whole class instruction. And this whole class instruction made student surveillance by teachers much more effective compared to earlier environments we looked at where the teachers were working one-on-one or with very small groups and leaving most of the students unattended. They're also starting to follow the New England pedagogy. And think about the Puritans and the people in that area of the country in the upper Northeast. Well, schools were attempting to transform education into a more enjoyable experience with less aversive techniques in classroom management and try to get away from just the rote learning and try to engage students more. So once again, classroom management changed. Set up more like an ideal family, teachers should exhibit more love. There should be more emotional dependence on the authority figure, which would be the teacher. And discipline, in this case, would not be through some kind of aversive technique, but rather it would be the fear of the withdrawal of that concern and love for the students and concern that they would have experience expressions of disappointment by the teacher. By the late 1800s into the early 1900s, we saw society changing even more because we find the market revolution going on, industrialism, and democracy, everything that's going on with democracy, inviting more people into the country, more changes. And society was getting concerned about threats to the Christian values and morality, concerns that maybe people will have more ambition and avarice and materialism and lose some of their original values. So the classroom environment also was changing at this time. Smaller classes, much more whole class instruction now, no need for relying on monitors, student monitors to help out. So in terms of management in the classroom, let's start to show more strictness. This was the era of punishment of students. Symbols of the classroom authority would be prominently displayed on teachers' desks or on the wall. So classroom management took a major turn here. As we moved into and through the 1900s, we find society changing. We had increasing social disorder. There's move to more corporate industrialism. And the marketplace changed to more of a consumer market from the way goods were mass produced to focus in on consumers. Well, that greatly impacted schools. The classroom environment was changing. Um, Students were given more freedom to decide what they would learn. We'd like to make a more engaging environment for students. And a prevailing thought was that children misbehave due to the punitive system that was instituted prior to this. So let's change it. So management was changing. Now let's have the teachers provide a more rich classroom. Let's stimulate learner curiosity. Let's engage the student. Let's change from focus on punishment to a focus on discipline. Having gained a little historical perspective, let's consider classroom management in today's world. Today, instead of focusing on discipline in the classroom, we focus more on the control and realize control sometimes has a negative connotation. We're not referring to that. We're talking about a teacher being in control, that a teacher is able to do the job. So control is definitely part of classroom management in these ways. The teacher works to prevent inappropriate behavior from happening. The teacher deals with inappropriate behavior. The teacher works with students who are exhibiting very appropriate behaviors and supports that. The teacher helps students ultimately learn to manage themselves so that they can develop self-control. And the teacher selects management techniques that are positive in enforcing and enhancing student self-esteem, with the end goal being that the teacher helps the students learn how to assume control and responsibility for their own behaviors and to take ownership of their learning. So if we are to provide maybe a simple definition of effective classroom management, it would certainly include the process of organizing and conducting a classroom so that student learning is maximized. And we have three goals, overall goals, in classroom management. Number one, we want to keep the students safe. We want them to be emotionally safe and physically safe in that classroom. We want to create an environment where they can effectively learn. After safety, number two, we want students to do their job. We want students to pay attention. We want them to comply with what we ask them to do. And we want them to work toward learning at the best, at the height of their abilities. We want to push them and stretch them a little bit, because that's what their job is, to learn and to engage in content so they can become the best they can be. So safety, have students do their job. And number three, ultimately, we want to manage students in ways that allow them to eventually figure how to manage themselves, to take responsibility for their own learning and their own behavior. That is the ultimate goal in classroom management, and the overreaching, like the long goal, the thing that will affect them throughout their lives. Realize in the process, if we're successful managers, students will trust us, they'll like being in our classrooms, they'll enjoy learning, and ultimately they will grow little by little to be more responsible and more independent. And that's one of the goals of going to school in general. Classroom management today doesn't focus on punishment of students, but rather we tend to focus on discipline. So what is the difference between discipline and punishment, and why have teachers made that move away from punishment towards discipline? In disciplining a student, a teacher is trying to help students learn to control their own behavior. Remember the three goals of classroom management, so that they act according to their understanding of what is right and wrong and make positive judgments, but not because they're trying to avoid punishment. Now, when we talk about punishment, a teacher is trying to stop a child from doing what he or she does not want them to do, and they're okay with using a painful or an unpleasant method to stop them. In discipline, the teacher is supporting, again, the child to learn self-control, to make positive decisions, and to look at those issues straight on. They can be used with middle school and high school students. Discipline techniques tend to build a child's self-esteem, and it sets a good example of effective ways to deal with problems that occur in life, even outside of the classroom. In the world of punishment, in this approach, this teaches a child to deceive adults. Because if someone is asked, did you do this? Why did you do this? Well, we might be showing students that they really need to lie. They need to deceive in their responses because they're going to seek to avoid the punishment. This does not work well typically with teenagers. It tends to tear down self-esteem. And further, it could teach a child over the long haul that violence is an acceptable way to solve and address problems. There are typically 4 different types of punishment. There's physical punishment. There's verbal punishment, which could take the form of shaming or being cruel or ridiculing the student. Withholding rewards or instituting different penalties. Now realize that those last 2, withholding rewards or instituting some type of penalty, does not have to be punishment. It could be part of a positive discipline approach. It depends on how it's administered by the teacher. So those last 2 don't have to be a negative thing. So why is punishment not an effective technique to use in classroom management? Well, first, because it builds anger in a child. That anger can be used against self, and it can be turned outward and used against other students and other adults. Physical punishment can make a child think that there must be something really wrong with them to warrant being treated so harshly and so badly by a teacher. Another reason is a vicious cycle can be formed. If a child thinks that he or she is bad, then they start to act bad, so to speak. If a child is being treated harshly, then they don't have the motivation to seek to be good. Or another thing can happen. The child might just do anything to avoid being punished. So in that process, they're not learning anything, and the teacher would not be supporting that self-understanding and that, like, I'll stand on my feet and I'll assume responsibility. I'm learning how to do that. They may just seek to not be punished and learn nothing. Let's conclude this video by working toward developing a philosophy of classroom management. As a new teacher, it's really important to have a thought-out overall classroom management plan or philosophy. This will certainly support effective teaching, and also guaranteed thinking through this philosophy or plan will support you when you go to be interviewed for a teaching position. What are you going to attempt to accomplish through classroom management? In your view, what are the keys to good classroom management? What are some of your main priorities in the area of classroom management as you enter the classroom for the first time? So what is your philosophy of classroom management? What is your perspective on it? What's your view of it? Let's consider that maybe you need to rethink the way you see classroom management. Maybe you need to reframe your concept of management. So let's take a look at a couple of thoughts in this regard. According to research, there are 5 critical skills that increase a student's chance of being successful in the employment world. Social skills, communication skills. Now, both of those are greatly affected by classroom management. We're trying to sharpen both of those skills. Higher order thinking. If classroom management is effective, hopefully the students can focus on developing those higher order thinking skills. The interpersonal skill of self-control. We've already stated that that's the ultimate goal of classroom management. And developing a positive self-concept to be effective in the employment world, well, again, that results from positive classroom management and self-management. In the world of employment, it's been reported that about 85% of workers who will lose their jobs will lose them, they'll be terminated due to inadequate social skills. Well, that's one of the goals of classroom management, is to develop those social skills. Further, employers seek workers with technical knowledge, certainly, but even at least as important, if not more importantly, they're looking for people who can function as members of a team, and they have decision making and good communication skills. They can plan and they can prioritize in the job related tasks. Again, these things are supported by positive classroom management. One researcher, Pariser, suggests that maybe teachers need to shift our perspective of classroom management. Instead of focusing on discipline or punishment or issues of that nature, maybe we should think of classroom management as the process of guiding students to be able to work collaboratively and to communicate well with each other and to listen to different thoughts and opinions and be tolerant and accepting and good listeners. Why is classroom management so important? To be an effective teacher, classroom management is something that we focus on concurrently along with teaching. For example, let's say that during instruction, one of your students starts to go off task and starts holding a conversation with surrounding students. What's an appropriate action to take while you're teaching? What will you do? A teacher has to get to know his or her students to be able to help them effectively. Let's say that in class, one of your students gets as far as the door and then bursts out into tears and refuses to enter the classroom. What are you going to do? A teacher has to be ready to deal with situations as they arise. Let's say, for example, that after 3 weeks into the academic year, one of your students picks up a ball and throws it to a friend, and that disrupts the class. What's an appropriate level of action that you're going to take in this case? Teachers have to be tuned into students and have to be responsive and understanding. Let's say, for example, you have a policy that students cannot use the lavatory while you are lecturing, and if they do, you're going to give them a detention. A few minutes after you begin teaching, one student bounds out of her seat and doesn't say where she's going and runs out to the lav. What's an appropriate action here? You might even encounter a student who is being outright defiant to the teacher. Let's say that you have a student who has been refusing to do homework this week, and after you announce an assignment to the class, this student announces to you and the class that he does not want to do any homework and says, if you give me homework, I'm going to go and throw it right in the garbage. What do you do in this case? So when you look at classroom management, the teacher is a central issue in classroom management. Therefore, this course is going to be about you and your style and your approach to classroom management. This course is not going to attempt to be as much prescriptive as it is an attempt to give you tools and techniques and strategies and best practices and ways to address classroom management issues. A comprehensive classroom management system can include items like your assessment system, grading, your different policies like attendance, homework, your rules and expectations of your students. It also includes how you intend to prevent inappropriate behaviors and how you intend to motivate and positively support appropriate behaviors to continue. How you're going to react to common issues and also more challenging behaviors. How you're going to record information about classroom management issues and behavior. How you're going to address harassment and bullying and cyberbullying. How you will address substance abuse. How you're going to make referrals. How you're going to interact with other professionals regarding student needs. How you're going to communicate with parents. How they can communicate with you. How parents can address medical or dietary or other issues of students with you. So as you can see, classroom management is central to what we do in the classroom, and we do it alongside teaching and working with students academically. Here I have pictured a page out of the PDE Form 430 for new teachers. Notice that there's a whole category established just for the classroom environment, which means classroom management issues and activities. Again, it's a central thing that we do as teachers. So in conclusion, in this course, we hope that you can gather and organize your ideas about classroom management, that you can identify specific goals and techniques and tools and tricks of management and best practices that you can use in your classroom, that you'll be able to articulate your philosophy of classroom management, and that you can describe your classroom management system. Now that you've watched this video, tune into Mod 1 in our Blackboard course. There's a file there which represents an activity based on the learning that we have engaged in this video. Have a great day and look forward to seeing you at our next class.